UFO whistleblower David Grusch has just been featured in a fascinating 2-hour-long interview-style documentary hosted by Jesse Michels over at Alchemy American in collaboration with Yes Theory, who is working on a larger documentary featuring David Grusch that will be released on September 24th. The full 2-hour video is 100% worth watching in its entirety, and kudos to the production team. I think they did a phenomenal job of not only directly addressing who is David Grusch and what are his contemporary allegations, but also overlaying that in the larger context of the legacy of the UFO story, which is complex, but I think they pull out the right key elements that are necessary to understand the gravity of not only David Grusch, but all of the other whistleblowers. Remember, we have multiple whistleblowers in this moment that are all saying the same thing. And that context from the Manhattan Project connection, how classification works within the government, what is pre-publication review and why can whistleblowers talk about this stuff, the contemporary legislation that Congress is doing. So let's take a look at some of the high-level elements and how it connects to the rest of the current UFO story.
I mean, it's not just me that, has come forward, really, because, Schumer, Rubio, all those guys are like, look, a bunch of freaking high-level officers came to us, and either they're crazy or the shit's real.
Most of these people, at some point, or maybe even currently, have held very high clearances.
So the first quick point I want to double click on is that David Grusch is not the only UFO whistleblower that is alleging that the U.S. government has a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. This point is important because whenever you have explosive allegations, the first thing people do who don't want to critically think about the underlying implications of those allegations is to try to assassinate the character of the person making said allegations. As we've covered on this channel historically, including that specific Rubio clip, the Senate has been talking to government whistleblowers, current and former, since 2019 about this exact allegation that David Grusch is making about a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. So regardless of what you may feel or not feel about David Grusch personally is totally irrelevant because the Senate is taking it seriously, which is why the Schumer-Rounds amendment that's currently a part of this year's NDAA, 64 pages, creates a 9-person presidential appointed, Senate confirmed UFO Disclosure Review Board that is going to go after government records related to this, as well as establishes eminent domain to take back possession of any private corporation or private citizen that has material of non-human intelligence, biological or technological. That is not just because of David Grusch. That is so important to understand as you digest everything else that is going on in this moment.
And then Schumer was compelled to write that big 64-page amendment that talks, no shit, non-human tech, recoveries. And you're the majority leader who's tight with the president, putting out a law that will be signed here hopefully this fall that really puts the fucking executive in a bind. So I don't think that was done in a vacuum.
If you follow my channel, and especially if you watched the deep dive video on that exact legislation, the UAP Disclosure Act for 2024, you will have heard me say this before. An authentic, organic, constitutional struggle between the legislative branch and the executive branch over who has the power and authority on UFO material. That is exactly what we're hearing now David Grusch say from his perspective, having been on the UAP task force, having reported to the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office on this issue and on the existence of this UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. He has also that same perspective. So I do encourage you to watch the full interview. There's a ton of stuff he gets into the weeds on all the details you want to know, the bodies, how long ago has this been happening, how do they work, where does he think they're coming from. All of that is in there. I think they do a great job. I don't want to clip too much of it out of context because the context is really valuable. The two things I will just pull out from this are a comment that he made about Neil deGrasse Tyson, which I just found entertaining, and also his message for the other whistleblowers that are waiting in the wings, which I have another note on here just in a second.
I don't like throwing shade, but like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's made up his mind. I've read his tweets, and I'm like, dude, you have a PhD in physics? Where's your curiosity? I can't even believe.
There's no evidence that would convince an authentic skeptic.
I have credentials too, and I'm happy to go toe-to-toe with you. If he wants to debate me, I'd be fine with that.
I have no notes. I just want it to be publicly known that I support a deGrasse Tyson versus Grusch debate on the UFO topic at any time. Now, all jokes and kidding aside, the interview really delves deeply into extremely technical subjects, as well as getting very personal with David Grusch, taking him out of the studio and being in real-world environments over the course of what was likely several weeks. We see a couple of features with his wife, who sort of speaks to her experience, and I think you just get a really authentic view into who this guy is and how his mind works, regardless of ultimately what you may think of the substance of the conversation. I think it was a really well-executed window into the world of this person from an intellectual, academic, government, as well as personal perspective, and it is worth, again, watching in its entirety. I could not recommend it highly enough, especially if you've been watching my content and appreciate the approach and the seriousness and nuance with which I try to address the issues. I do want to share just one last clip here that occurred towards the end of the interview when David Grusch was asked, does he have a message to send out to any of the first-hand witnesses or other whistleblowers with first-hand experiences within the UFO programs? And here's what he had to say.
Something you would like to say directly to someone too?
On the program? Yeah, I know if you're on the program, I understand empathetically, the risks, what you put yourself through. We're trying to create a time where we can get this out there, recruit better people, hopefully protect those who want to go forward. If you want to go forward, there is a legal process, either through PPD-19, if it's an intel thing, DOD, there's other inspector generals. You do have the right to go directly to Congress. And then, of course, some of the senior leaders that have known about this stuff, and I understand they were in positions where they had to make decisions just like anybody else, and they're not at the top of the pyramid. I think the time is right to cement maybe your final legacy and to help out, even though I know there'll be some admittance of, maybe decisions you've made that you wish in the past maybe you didn't make. But I think it's time to move forward, and I think we'll be stronger as a nation and as a world. I think it's going to enhance national security, enhance peer competition policing, so that people aren't doing things unethical and immoral. If everything's in secret, everybody can get away with things that might be illegal, unethical, immoral, and hold our adversaries accountable publicly if this is a thing that we acknowledge. And once again, nuclear physics, broadly studied. Nuclear weapons development, that's classified. So that's all I have to say.
I find that last clip so fascinating because it touches on several aspects of the question of why is this all happening right now, which I could spend a whole video pulling the strings on. I just want to talk about one aspect of this, which is what are China and Russia doing, right? I just want to focus on that. David Grusch kind of addresses this with this concept of the near peer policing, or basically saying, if we look at nukes, with nukes we have a protocol to be able to look at what Russia's doing, what China's doing, so there's some semblance of control over these weapons of mass destruction. No infrastructure like that exists for UAP crash retrievals. And this is interesting because in the original article that David Grusch went public in the debrief back earlier this year, a couple months ago, there was a quote from another DoD employee. His name was Carl Nell. In that quote, he was asked about, do you believe these crash retrieval programs exist? And if so, why is now the time to come forward? And he said, yes, they do exist. There's been a sub-Rosa Cold War going on between the likes of us, Russia, and China around who can basically get there first in terms of cracking how it works. And the fear is that now, in this exact moment today, that China is potentially making some significant progress because they're less stovepiped, they have less overclassification problems, and are bringing in their best scientists. And it's for that reason that by putting this in the public now, we are going to be better able to deal with whatever advancement they may or may not have been making. So we have a separate point of confirmation around that thought process, and that continues to be what we hear the national security perspective around why now is if they do or if they have cracked something, we don't want to be surprised by that. And if you just can't get into David Grusch, have no fear because documentary filmmaker James Fox has an upcoming surprise for you.
We're meeting with the intel folks on the inside that have already gone to testify to ARROW, which is run by Sean Kirkpatrick. That's the new UAP task force. And they're going on camera with people like myself.